I will just mute.
Hello, good morning. Hello.
Hello, good morning,
Good
sir.
morning. Morning,
Hello,
sir.
good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Hello, everybody. Welcome.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Prof.
Good morning.
Morning, sir. Morning.
Good morning to everyone.
Morning, sir.
Hello.
Good
Morning.
morning.
Sirs.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hello, good morning.
Sir Ace,
Yes. Good morning.
nakikita mo ako? Hindi ko alam paano to eh.
Practice the controls.
How? Nakikita ako?
Yes, everybody can see you also.
Oh, but I cannot see myself.
Oh,
How? Okay. Ah,
Hello?
Hi, Sir Ace. Good morning po.
good morning, Irish.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome
Good morning.
to Security Matters and AAA event. Before we begin, I'd just like to share some pointers about the use of our Zoom conferencing facilities. So while the speaker will be sharing and discussing and presenting his shed slides, the participants will be on mute. However, you might also get unmuted if there are background noises where you are. Please try to make sure that the voices don't get connected to the conference to avoid distractions. If you're not familiar with that, if you look at the bottom part of the screen, there are icons, microphone icon and a video icon. So you can click that and you will go mute, or you can click it again and you will be unmuted also with the video. Now, for some people who might have difficulty with their internet connections, one advice is to remove the video, turn off your videos so that it doesn't eat up the bandwidth for your internet connection. If you want to react, there is a reaction button. You can click on that and you can applaud or share a thumbs up. Now, there's also a button where you can answer questions from the host. If you click on the participants icon, you will see there are several options. Yes, no, go slower, go faster. Um, and you can also have other reactions there as well. If you have questions about Zoom or if you're having problems, you can send also a chat privately to me or to Miss Lai Esteban. My name is Wally Panganiban. You can reach us through private messaging through the chat that's on the right side. Sorry, that's between the participants icon and the share screen icon. So again, if you have any concerns about your Zoom experience, please message us privately. We will respond to you as soon as possible. By the way, you can also share your questions through to the discussion through the chat. Key in your questions, and we will make sure that our speakers and our host gets to read them during the discussions and the Q&A portions. Thank you, everybody. Welcome and enjoy this session.
Good morning, everyone. You can unmute yourself now while I'm talking so that we can have a uh, exchange of warm welcome to everyone. We can start any minute from now because Professor Banlaoi is already on board. No, he was supposed to be possibly to be interviewed by ENC. So welcome to this webinar. I'm sure you missed the lecture series of Security Matters before that we've been hosting for several years. Now at these times of COVID, we are already switching to digital and we are going to have webinars and then we will continue with our lecture series. And this is the first one that we are going to have an anti-terrorism lecture series. We used to have this event focused on several industries. And I welcome back the alumni to all those who, the alumni of our past sessions. So you can still share the links to other friends so that we can accommodate 2,000 more because right now we're almost 67, 70. So this is sponsored by Ace and Associates. You can see already that the details of Ace and Associates. For those who are new to Ace and Associates, we provide holistic asset protection and risk management consultancy. And we are now evolving into resiliency services. So we are going to have more colleagues that are joining us, and we are merging with resiliency. So most of us, we know already Security Matters. That's the first and the only Security Matters of this format. No, the magazine is the first and the leader in digital and print publication, and we're now hosting more webinars in the future. And very soon you will get the invitation. So don't forget to subscribe to our newsletters or like our pages so that you will be updated on the forthcoming events. Especially now that you can see the whole world, we are having a lot of challenges. No? For those who follow the world, you can see that there are terrorism in almost all areas of the world. There are protests that are not really terrorism, but the looting are somehow more than the terrorism. So if you look at what has happened now in the US, there are more than 100 buildings that were burned down. So people might look at it in a different way. So I welcome everyone again to this webinar. The webinar is also sponsored by Arslan SRS Philippines. This is the branch office of Arslan SRS. Probably most of you have known that Arslan and SRS is the security consultant of World Cup Games and also Olympic Games. Unfortunately, we we have to postpone the real works to next year in Tokyo Olympics. And in today's world, we're talking about VOCA, and we have our own VOCA to the original VOCA, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. So for Resilient PH, our new tagline is vigilance, understanding, collaboration, and action. So our event today is in partnership with the Philippine Institute for Peace and Violence and Terrorism Research. No, probably you heard that about Dr. Banlaoi, and the Research Institute is an independent academic research institute and a non-government, non-profit, and non-partisan think tank. It promotes the principle of non-violence and upholds the culture of peace by conducting rigorous investigative studies, intelligence analysis, and peace research to understand the pathologies of terrorism in the Philippines. So AEA and SecurityMatters, like PIPVTR, hold trainings, lectures, seminars, conferences, and roundtable discussions to examine the underlying factors or root causes of armed conflicts, political violence, security cases, terrorism in the Philippines and abroad. So in the invitation that you have received, that's why you're here now, the details of the speakers and the host are there already. So we can start anytime now if the Professor Banlaoi. Let me introduce myself. I am, again, Ace Esmeralda. I'm the President and Managing Director of Ace and Associates Risk Management Incorporated. No? We are independent consultancy. We have no conflict of interest with any security agency. We are not a vendor, but we design technical security plans for a lot of buildings. So we want to remain independent, just like our partner also PIPVTR. So our main speaker for today that I'm going to just back up because he is far, far beyond that what I know in terrorism, even if I am an anti-terrorism specialist. Professor Banlaoi is beyond our league. No? He's a Filipino academic and international security analyst. He's a political science scholar also. And you can see a lot of his credentials already on the landing page of where we are invited. So when the Anti-Terrorism Bill was sent into the houses, Professor Banlaoi and I started talking about it and then asking about the involvement of the private sector or a lot of other stakeholders in the terrorism world. No? Because right now we have realized that terrorism is more targeted towards private assets, towards corporations, and towards the non-government entities. Because I believe that if the terrorists will attack a military or government installation, it doesn't really mean terror to them. It's just like an act of war. But then if you target already the private component, the private sector, then violence is really more amplified. So I think it's now time for us to give the floor to Professor Banlaoi. Professor?
Thank you very much, Ace. Good morning to everyone.
Let's switch slides.
Okay. Good morning. Are we ready?
Prof.
Okay.
Lai, are you sharing now? Lai, are you sharing?
Okay, I think it's okay already.
Okay.
Can I start now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, and thank you very much, Ace and Associates, for this opportunity to again share my thoughts on the controversial issue of the new anti-terrorism law, otherwise known as the new Anti-Terrorism Bill. So Ace invited me to talk about this in order to pursue our continuing partnership on counterterrorism research, and at the same time share my recent thoughts on the issue. This presentation emanates from the article I published recently on the new anti-terrorism law, Fighting Terrorism with Justice. This article has been published in our website and Southeast Asian Review, as well as Eurasian Review. So what's the controversy about this new anti-terrorism law? What I'm going to do is to make a very short presentation in order to allow more rooms for discussions and question and answer. So next slide. So what are the main feature of this anti-terrorism law that has been certified urgent by the president and now passed by both the Senate and the House of Representatives? We are talking about two basic bills, one from the Senate Bill 1083 and House Bill 6875. These bills are identical bills, so you can read both bills, and they are really very identical. And what are the main features of this new anti-terrorism law? First, the new law removes the requirement of the Human Security Act, the payment of 500,000 pesos per day to suspects for wrongful arrest, because this kind of provision from the Human Security Act of 2007 is deterring law enforcement authorities to apply this law for counterterrorism. And they removed that in order to allow law enforcement authorities to use an anti-terrorism law that will really encourage them to pursue counterterrorism operation. However, critics denounce the removal of this requirement as they regard this as a safeguard against abuse and arbitrary arrest. But if you will look at the content of the Senate Bill 1083 and House Bill 6875, there are enough safeguards for human rights protection in the new anti-terrorism law. Next slide. The law also extends the period of preventive detention from 3 days to 4 days, 14 days, with the possibility of another 10-day extension upon approval of appropriate Philippine courts, particularly the Courts of Appeal. Why we need to extend the preventive detention period from 3 days to 14 days? The rationale behind that is to allow more time for investigators to get valuable information from the terror suspect. A longer detention period can also provide ample time to facilitate interrogation. But what is very important provision in the anti-terrorism law is the prohibition of the use of torture or coercion in the process of interrogation. So that is one safeguard under the law. Next slide. By extending the time for preventive detention, it can also incapacitate the suspected terrorist from wreaking havoc, and at the same time, it can lawfully hold suspect when usual criminal charges cannot be filed for some technical considerations. And if you will compare this provision from other practices abroad, the 14-day preventive detention period is in fact very short. In fact, we follow the Australian model of imposing 14 days preventive detention. In other countries, preventive detention period is longer. Next slide. Third, the new anti-terrorism law authorizes counterterrorism units of the Philippine Court to conduct a 60-day surveillance of suspected terrorists through the use of wiretapping technologies, and another 30-day extension upon approval of the Court of Appeals. Next slide. So why do we need a wiretapping? we need wiretapping because that is a practice in counterterrorism. If you want to strengthen the gathering of actionable information on the threat, then you need facilities to investigate and gather information. This wiretapping is not a arbitrary wiretapping. It is a lawful wiretapping, practiced also in other countries, particularly the United States and even democratic countries, even Australia and the United Kingdom. Now, there is a provision in the anti-terrorism law that if there is an illegal use of wiretapping activities, then law enforcement officers found guilty of illegal use of wiretapping will be penalized for a period of 10 years if proven guilty. One major innovation, one important innovation of the anti-terrorism law is the creation of anti-terrorism courts. Okay? Existing regional trial courts can be designated as anti-terrorism courts in order to speed up trials of terrorism cases, because there were a lot of complaints about delay and even slowness in the trials of terrorism cases, and this particular provision will allow the existing regional trial courts and even municipal courts to designate anti-terrorism courts to focus specifically on terrorism cases. Next slide. And of course, like the Human Security Act of 2007, it creates the Anti-Terrorism Council. But compared to the Human Security Act of 2007, the new anti-terrorism law creates a permanent management and operating arm, and that is the Project Management Center. Because under the Human Security Act of 2007, the PMC does not have any permanent employees. So this law institutionalizes the PMC and at the same time empowering the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency to serve as the secretariat of the ATC. Next slide. Well, this is the very controversial aspect of the new counterterrorism law, and that is the proscription of terrorists. Upon authority of the Anti-Terrorism Council, and in fact, recommendation from NICA, who is in charge of gathering information about terrorist threats in the Philippines, any organization, association, or group of persons can be proscribed as terrorist organizations for committing acts of terrorism identified by the new anti-terrorism law. This means that persons associated with or belonging to and even professing to belong to this proscribed organization can be charged of terrorism. Even mere support, if you're providing assistance, facilitating operations, cuddling terrorists, or even financing terrorism, you will be charged of terrorism cases under this law. Next slide. Now, there are human rights worries because of those innovations I mentioned earlier. Opposition leaders, cause-oriented groups, human rights organizations, and even individual activists have expressed enormous worries that the new anti-terrorism law can lead to blatant violation of human rights. We respect that kind of position and we know where those worries are coming from. But under the new anti-terrorism law, it empowers the Commission on Human Rights to ensure that in the implementation of this law, the human rights of suspected terrorists will be protected and enhanced. There is a provision in Senate Bill 1083, Section 47, mentioning specifically the vital role of the Commission on Human Rights in the implementation of the anti-terrorism law. Even in the Declaration of Policy in Section 2, it gives high importance to the role of the Commission of Human Rights in order to ensure that this anti-terrorism law will safeguard the needed human rights. And even during the period of detention, there are enough human rights safeguards that the Miranda Doctrine will be upheld, that no suspects can be interrogated without the presence of a lawyer. And if a lawyer is not available, then the state has the obligation to provide free legal assistance through the Integrated Bar of the Philippines or Public Attorney's Office. And if the suspect does not have a lawyer, he maintains the suspect rights to remain silent. So that's the Miranda Doctrine. So unfortunately, the Commission of Human Rights is not part of the Anti-Terrorism Council because the Anti-Terrorism Council is composed of cabinet officials, but there is one specific provision in the anti-terrorism law about the role of the Commission on Human Rights to oversee the operations of law enforcement authorities in counterterrorism. Next slide. Now, this is a very important aspect of counterterrorism. Counterterrorism relies heavily on the power of our intelligence sector and at the same time the security sector, particularly the investigating agencies like the NBI, the police, and to a certain extent the armed forces of the Philippines. Under this law, what the law enforcement authorities, particularly the police and the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency, are given more power. But for the military, there's no added power for the military because, you know, the role of the military is search and destroy. You know, if you mobilize the military, they will pursue focused military operation. So the operation is search and destroy. But on the part of law enforcement, the main intention is to arrest and jail in order to put terrorists to justice. So in order to allay fear of the public about the possibility of this law to be used for abuse, what we are advocating is for a continuing intelligence reform in order to overcome the negative perception lodged against our intelligence sectors. And intelligence units in the Philippines have a very negative perception, and we need to overcome that in order to remove the anxieties of the people about possible abuse. And this reform should gear towards the establishment of a more responsible and accountable intelligence sector, which means the intelligence sector must be subjected to strong oversight of civilian institutions like the Commission on Human Rights, the Anti-Terrorism Council, and even the judicial and legislative branches of the Philippine government. Next slide. Aside from intelligence reform is the need for security sector transformation. What does it mean? It means that all security sectors, particularly members of the Anti-Terrorism Council, must also uphold the principle of responsible and accountable governance of the security sector in order to prevent this security sector to abuse themselves in power. Because this is my opinion as an analyst. If we are really facing a very abusive government, and the government has the intention, a bad intention, to really use this law for political purposes, then this law, there's no doubt that this law can be used for state terrorism. And that is why we want to prevent that to happen. We want to make sure that this law will be used solely for countering terrorism and now countering legitimate political dissent or legitimate political oppositions. What this law is trying to prevent is for individuals and organizations using violence to wreak havoc in our society. But if you have complaints about the government, if you have issues against the government, you can still air those issues freely. Okay? However, if you start advocating the use of violence, if you start expressing support to proscribe terrorist organizations, then the security sector and the intelligence sector have the authority to apply this anti-terrorism law. Next slide. Now, we need to fight terrorism with justice. And how we can fight terrorism with justice? Fighting terrorism does not only mean putting terrorism to jail. Defeating terrorism needs to address, this is a cliche, the underlying conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism, but without necessarily using these underlying conditions to justify acts of terrorism. Next slide. And this is a very good aspect of the new anti-terrorism law. There is a very important provision requiring the Philippine government to implement a program on countering and preventing violent extremism. This provision states that countering and preventing violent extremism shall address the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism. And what are these conditions? Next slide. One, ethnic, national, and religious discrimination. So we need to address that because that underlying condition is fueling and encouraging peoples and individuals to commit acts of terrorism. Second, socioeconomic disgruntlement. Third, political exclusion. Next is the humanization of victims of terrorism. And this is very, very important, the next item, lack of good governance. And more importantly, prolonged and unresolved conflicts by winning the hearts and minds of the people to prevent them from engaging in violent extremism. So if you will look at the intent of this law, it has the intention to really address the root causes of terrorism in the Philippines. Next slide. If the Philippine government will prioritize implementing this particular provision of the anti-terrorism law, while at the same time pursuing intelligence reforms and security sector transformation, this law will not scare the public. In fact, this law will even get the needed public approval and support because we are fighting terrorism in the Philippines with justice. So with that now, I am ready for interrogation, okay, lawful interrogation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, who will like to start the first question? Just raise your hands in the video or check on the raise hands or reaction.
Right. Thank you, Sir Ace. There is a question from Miss Ava Avila. Maybe Ava
Hi,
can
Ava.
share this.
From Washington, D.C. Hi, Ava.
Oh, hi. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Hello.
Yeah, I know.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Since it's very late from my side, pwedeng 2 questions na lang ako, Rommel. Thanks for the presentation.
Yes.
Yes. So first question is, this administration has blatantly in the past mocked the role of the Commission on Human Rights. So how can we be ensured that rights are protected? Example of mocking of CHR is the 1,000 pesos budget and etc. Second question is we don't have our security sector is not yet reformed, and if we have this anti-terror bill without an improved security sector, which should it go first? Security sector development first before terror bill, or application of the terror bill, and then just proceed whatever security reform will be pursued. Thank you.
Yeah. In fact, this law is empowering the Commission on Human Rights, and therefore, if this law is approved, then the Commission of Human Rights has legal basis to assert more its authority. So it has to also capacitate itself in order to ensure that human rights protection is really observed under this law. So we need the people, the people rallying against this law must also rally for the empowerment of the Commission of Human Rights, because it has a special provision in this law. So the Commission on Human Rights has to assert its role in the existing law. And if the existing government will undermine the role of the Commission of Human Rights, then there are legal ways to account our officials. And one way of accounting our public officials is really to also strengthen the capability of our civilian institutions for oversight. We have the Senate, we have the Congress, we have the judiciary, we have people's organization, we have private individuals, So we have demonstrated in 1986 and 2001 that Filipino people have the capability to assert its power against abusive government. So it is also a warning to any governments in the Philippines that if they will dare use this anti-terrorism law for abuse in power, then government's power emanates from the people, so the people has the right to get this power away from abusive government. And we have demonstrated in the past that under that situation, the armed forces of the Philippines, the Philippine National Police, and law enforcement authorities will always side with the will of the people. We have seen that in 1986 and in 2001. Now, regarding issue of security sector transformation, is a continuing effort of the government, and that is why in the countering and preventing violent extremism, there is one aspect there promoting good governance, and I think we have to invest more resources towards that goal, and that is improving good governance not only at the national level but also at the local level. So if we see local government officials and national government officials performing their jobs, then there's no reason for people to become terrorists. Now, terrorism is in fact justified by a certain ideology. And that is the main focus of the countering and preventing violent extremism in order to defeat the ideology that endorses acts of terrorism. I hope I satisfied you, Ava. And one importantly, this is a technical aspect of the new anti-terrorism law. We are also required by several international organizations to really revise our existing anti-terrorism law because they find our anti-terrorism law very weak. So we need to show to them that we are strengthening our anti-terrorism law. Otherwise, we will be blacklisted by them, especially on the financing of terrorism. So this is also our international commitment to make sure that we have a law that is really capable of addressing terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor, hello.
Yes, good morning. And
Yeah, good morning,
good-
Professor. I just wanted to ask, because you earlier discussed about this bill, particularly fighting terrorism with justice, which means that in the fight against terrorism, the judicial arm of both the PNP and the military should also be strengthened.
Yes.
I've been working in that in my past life in that environment, and sorry to say, but our legal department in both the PNP and the military is left to be desired. So I hope this particular bill would strengthen the judge and the PNP legal service to assist our operating troops in the pursuit of counterterrorism. Secondly, on the issue of the various departments, I'm just wondering whether this particular bill sets out the responsibilities of each department, because looking at the various conditions that this particular bill is seeking to address, there are conditions that have been there for the longest time. You know, I've been in the service, and I've known those conditions existing. So unless we actually empower and provide responsibilities and accountabilities to these departments, then this particular bill, I'm sorry to say, but you know, it will face difficulties in ensuring its success, because you know, to be able to address those conditions, you need to have a unified approach, meaning all the departments should have one single mind, one single direction in trying to address terrorism. If that is not included in the bill, then I don't think we would ever see the light of even minimizing to the lowest extent possible the terrorism in this country.
Thank you very much. Let me just say this. We know that those underlying conditions will take time to really address, but we are dealing with a threat that is real, that is presenting clear and present danger to our society. Without a law, it will be difficult for our law enforcement to address this immediate threat. I think the urgency of passing this bill emanates from an assessment of existing current threats that Filipino people have to face. If you are monitoring the activities of the Islamic State, it is taking advantage of the pandemic in order to mobilize its followers worldwide to mount terrorist attacks. And even saying that the coronavirus is, in fact, part of the soldiers of Allah. And if you are privy to the ongoing situation right now in conflict-affected areas in the Philippines with presence of pro-Islamic state individuals and groups, that are intentions to really mount terrorist havocs. And without an effective counter-terrorism law, these terrorist groups and personalities will outsmart again our law enforcement authority. So what this law is offering is for our law enforcement to have more capabilities to address these imminent threats that we face. Now, regarding long-term issues, it will really take time to really address the issue of discrimination. It will really take time to address the issue of good governance and even achieving the idea of political inclusion. It will really take time. But while doing that, we need the intelligence and security sector also have to start pursuing reforms that they have been doing. In the case, for example, of the police, there's a police transformation under 2030, although we're so disappointed by the pacing of this transformation, at least we see police being transformed. It will take time to transform the whole institutions. But hope springs eternal that we will have a time where our authorities will be transformed. But it will be a continuing problem. Even mature democracies like in the United States, in France, they have also having problems. And we are not a mature democracies. We are a developing democracies. Our political system is still developing. So we will commit mistakes along the way. But what this law is preventing is commission of acts of terrorism. Now, how can we prevent law enforcement authorities from abuse? There are provisions in the law that ensure that those law enforcement officers abusing themselves in power will be penalized. And if the existing government condones the abuse of this law enforcement, then the people has the option to do other political options. Okay? Even extra constitutional option. Now, can the government use this law against people using extra constitutional options? Yes, it can be done. That is why we also have to ensure that our government will not be abusive. But if the government continues to be abusive, then it requires not a legal measure, but an extra legal measure. You see? But right now, we have to give our law enforcement a chance to prove itself. And if our law enforcement will not prove itself and will continue its lapses in violating human rights during counterinsurgency and counter-terrorism operations, and even in the context of the war on drugs, then, power of the state emanates from the people. So the people should rise up. Okay? But meanwhile, we need to address the imminent terrorist threat that we face. And this threat is not imagined threat. This threat is real. This is real threat.
Thank you, Professor.
Professor Banlaoi,
Yes.
thank you so much for your presentation. Dalia Simangan from Hiroshima University in Japan.
Oh, yes. Dalia?
Hi, sir.
Hello. Nice greeting you. I've been reading your work.
Thank you so much. I've been reading your work as well. So,
Yeah.
thank you. your that giving us this technical background of this bill, and I understand that terrorism is a real danger, as you've said, and the underlying conditions of terrorism are complex and dynamic and ever changing, and we need more long-term solutions to address these conditions. But can you
Right.
give an example, because you've mentioned this at the end of your presentation, that this bill somehow addresses the root causes of terrorism, you know, using, when you said that this is related to justice as well. So can you give an example or two of how this law or this bill specifically and directly addresses the root causes of terrorism? Thank you.
For example, we now have an existing national action plan to counter and prevent violent extremism that applies both the whole of government and whole of nation approach. Then we can take advantage of that existing plans, which was in fact crafted with the assistance of UNDP. Then we just have to ensure that those action plans are implemented. You know, we have existing action plans. So we need to mobilize also the support of the civil society organization and even think tanks and even individuals to make sure that the plans are implemented. Because these plans, countering and preventing violent extremism, addresses all these long-term underlying conditions. But at the same time, we need to address the current danger. Then there's a provision in the new anti-terrorism law about capacity building for law enforcement. And that requires not only training for our law enforcement, but also counterterrorism cooperation with other countries. So we have existing programs. Even our Philippine Development Plan has provisions about achieving peace, see, and as part of the requirement for economic development. Now, this is now the very difficult problem that we face. We are now experiencing economic downturn, and this economic downturn is being used by violent extremist groups to rally people to support their cause. So the government really has to work twice as fast in order to prevent these people from succumbing to the temptation of these violent extremist ideologies. So the government has also needs to prove also that it has better options than these violent extremist groups.
Thank you, sir. Just a quick follow-up. Are these plans embedded in the law?
Yes, there is a provision on countering and preventing violent extremism. It is embedded in the law, and details of that provision should be laid out in the implementing rules and regulation. But it's there. In fact, that is one of the provision that I strongly supported, the inclusion of the countering and preventing violent extremism.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dalia.
Hi, Professor. Mr. J. Javines was raising his hand earlier.
Yes.
Sir J,
Good
if
morning,
you can raise
Jay.
your question.
Yes, sir. Jay Javines, sir, here, sir. Sir, my
Good
question,
morning, Jay.
yes, sir, one of the provisions, sir, particularly section 25, if I'm not mistaken, is talk about the responsibility of the ATC to designate a
Yes.
terrorist, a person or a group as terrorist.
Proscription, yeah. It's a proscription, yeah.
Yeah, no, sir. Designation and proscription, sir. I think it's section 25 and proscription is section 26.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, sir. I would like to ask, sir, if there is a vetting process as to how ATC would come up or designate a person or a group as terrorist, sir.
Yes, there will be a vetting process. There will be interagency coordination to designate a terrorist organization so that not all organization will be labeled as terrorists. One of the most important criteria for designation of terrorists is the use of violence.
Yes, sir.
The use of violence. But if your organization is not promoting violence and advocating peace and advocating political change through the use of nonviolence, then you will not be designated as terrorists. So we're talking about designating groups and individuals as terrorists. Like, for example, the only group that has been designated officially is the Abu Sayyaf group. And some European governments designated the New People's Army as foreign terrorist organizations. But under the current law, Human Security Act of 2007, we're having a problem designating other groups as terrorist organizations. So with this law, other groups can be designated by the Anti-Terrorism Council as a terrorist organization. And what are these groups? These groups are groups. We have the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighter with 3 factions, the Toraype, Karyalan, and Bungos faction. But the Toraype faction is the most lethal one. Then we have remnants of the Maute group. In fact, I'm not using anymore the Maute group because it's already headed by another individual in the person of Ken Kermin Bentas or Abu Sakaria. So I call it the Abu Sakaria group. Okay. So, and then we still have the remnants of the Ansar Khalifa Philippines now being headed by a certain Commander Nilong, or what we call the Nilong group. But we have a new group, the Hasan Salahuddin group, or the Salahuddin group, is the new group being headed by Hasan Salahuddin, which I consider as the master bomber. I consider him as the substitute now of, or the replacement now of Basit Osman, because he was trained by Marwan and even Dulmatin during the Al-Qaeda days. So with this new law, these individuals and organizations will be designated as terrorist organizations, and therefore giving more rooms for law enforcement to pursue them and put them to justice. Yes. Are you? Yeah.
There's
Do you
a
have a
question
follow-up question?
from. Oh, sorry. There's a comment from Colonel Gary Pingin. Please expound on terrorism aside from Islamic State. I think, Professor, you've referenced several. And he has a follow-up comment as well. CPP, NPA, and their recruiters, not Sawadjaan Group, all their derivatives, sir.
Professor?
The Sawadjaan group, it's a part of Abu Sayyaf group, the Purujin Dama group, a part of the Abu Sayyaf group. So they will be included, they will be designated terrorist group. How about the New People's Army? You know, this is my understanding of this law, and based also on the study group organized by the UP College of Law that provided inputs to the drafting of this anti-terrorism law. The New People's Army will be targeted also by this law, because the New People's Army is also engaged in acts of terrorism. So, and if you are an individual, or you belong to an organization supporting, financing, and even embracing
Recruitment.
and even facilitating recruitment of the New People's Army, this law will be applied. You know, this law. That's why this law does not only aim to address threats emanating from violent extremist groups in Mindanao associated with the Islamic State, but it will also address other groups engaged in acts of terrorism. And that is why this law is not an anti-Muslim law, because it also has the intention to really target all organizations embracing acts of terrorism, or believing in acts of terrorism, or supporting acts of terrorism, or even financing acts of terrorism. So with this law, those individuals and organizations doing such in order to facilitate the commission of terrorism will be put to justice under this law. So the law can be applied against them. That's the intention, my interpretation. That it has the intention also to address threats emanating from the violent communist movement.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. I make a comment, sir?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned about the implementation of the CVE under the ATC.
Correct.
way back 2013 or 2014, we crafted the clustering of the four groups under
Correct.
the ATC for the CVE. I've
Correct.
been part of that workshop in Tagaytay. That
Yes, yes,
for
yes.
the
That's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
for the law enforcement portion, we belong to one cluster. And what I observed, Professor Banlaoi, is that we had a very good program under the ATC and the PMC, but coming observing from the point of view of the implementers, where I belong, the actual cascading to the ground units, the implementing units, uh, that's where we had some problems. The, the program itself is crafted very good, but on the implementation side, that's where we had the problem. And also, uh, enhancing the capability of the law enforcement, especially the counterterrorism units of the PNP. And as you said a while ago, that the military will only come into play for the search and destroy portion, but for law enforcement, serving of
Correct.
warrant of arrest, uh, searching the hideouts, that's for the law enforcement. So with
Correct.
this new law, possibly the president will sign this anytime. We had a very hard time uh, convicting suspected terrorists because the former Human Security Act, to tell you frankly, has no teeth at all.
Yeah.
Imagine the 500,000 per day uh, penalty for a law enforcement that after the final judgment, the suspect would be found out to be not guilty at all. We only had one conviction for that. And it's good that this law will be approved soon. And there's one comment here that terrorism is not equated to Islamic belief. That's true, sir. We do not equate terrorism with the Islamic belief, but those it depends if the one intimidating is a moderate or a hardcore ustads or imam. It depends. If you advocate jihad, the violent means, then we can equate Islamic belief into terrorism. But most of our Muslim brothers still follow the moderate or the traditional way of seeing the Islamic teaching. Thank you, Professor Banlawi.
Yeah, thank you for that inputs. In fact, I can sense from your comments the frustration about implementing good plans, but the problem of implementing good plans, and that's a perennial problem of developing countries like the Philippines. Not only a problem of the Philippines, but a problem of many developing countries worldwide experiencing terrorist problems like Pakistan, even Indonesia and Malaysia. So it's a perennial problem of really implementing good plans into real actions or solutions. So that is why we need a vigilant private sector. We need a vigilant civil society to really be part of the whole process of addressing these underlying conditions. What the new anti-terrorism law is offering is more capabilities for law enforcement to do its job. Because without a new capabilities, it will be very difficult for the law enforcement to do its job. Now, if the law enforcement does not perform its job as mandated by the law and start to abuse itself in power, you can read from the new anti-terrorism law several punishment for wrongdoings of law enforcement. Now, if we have a government that condones the wrongdoings of law enforcement, then we have larger authority then to account our governments from their wrongdoings. That is why we are advocating for a responsible and accountable intelligence and security sector. What do you mean by responsible? Responsible means that you will use your power because you were given power. You will use this power for legitimate purposes and not for personal or any political, partisan political agenda. Now, you're accountable because if you committed lapses or wrongdoings in the performance of your duty, then you have to account for that mistakes. You have to account for that wrongdoings. And the law accounts those officials committing wrongdoings in the implementation of this law. Now, can we trust our law enforcement? That's now a problem in the Philippines. You know, our law enforcement has a very high trust deficit. You know, so there is a tall order for our law enforcement to really prove itself that they are not the monster that we are afraid of. That they are not that they are not the Leviathan monster that we should be scared of. That they are there to protect ourselves from acts of terrorism, to protect our society from acts of terrorism. That is why I am coordinating very closely with our friends in the Philippine National Police, providing advices through Advisory Council to really be serious in their police transformation. It's very disappointing process, but if we will mobilize the private sector, we will mobilize the civil society to pay attention to this process and help our police transform itself to be effective and accountable, I think it can be done, but it will really take time and sacrifices. Meanwhile, we need to address the current danger that we face. And the only way to address the current danger that we face is by providing our law enforcement enough wherewithal to fight the threat.
Prof, this is, I'm going to call Alan next. He has been sharing questions privately. Alan,
Yeah.
please raise your questions now.
Alan, good morning.
Hello, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning.
This John Officer Alan po.
Good morning. Good morning. I can't hear you.
Okay, while waiting for Alan to share his questions, I will read.
Good morning, sir. Actually, I would like to share some point of view. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Yes,
Good morning.
sir.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Okay, I will read out loud what
Hello.
Sir Alan.
Hello, sir.
Go ahead, Sir Alan.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Sir, during our interview with the suspected terrorists here in the BGMP, some of them are wrongfully accused.
Yep.
At ang iba pa, sir, nalaman natin na ano po yung dahilan, bakit sila nagiging violent at turns out to be extremist. Dahil din po sa poverty, sa practice, at saka sa belief. At minsan po, sir, ang mga leader nila, maaaring off the record, sir. So alam naman po natin kung sino nasa taas. Hindi natin din masabi kasi wala tayong tunay na patotoo na sila talaga ay connected. So, ang karamihan sa kanila po, sir, sinasabi dahil sa sila ay Muslim, kinukunik na sila sa terrorist. So, tapos po yung iba talagang gawa na rin po ng kahirapan at saka sa paniniwala sa bilit nila na kapag sinabihan sila ng ganito daw, kailangan nilang gawin para sa pamumuhay nila. So, dapat siguro, sir, yun ang isang maistama natin sa polisiya na malaman kung ano yung mga indicator na sila po ba ay nagiging terrorist. Bakit? Paano? At sino? Yun na po yung gusto kong kasi po sa mga interview na nakakulong dito sa amin, nakakausap po.
Hello? Hello?
I think we lost Sir Alan.
Well,
Did you get
in
the
fact,
question?
Yeah, in fact, he is addressing a very important issue pertaining to the Muslim detainees accused of various crimes associated with terrorism. Because I also conducted research on that at SICA, Special Intensive Care Area in Camp Bikutan, Camp Bagong Diwa in Bikutan. How can we prevent that thing to happen again? That is why we have this national action plan to counter and prevent violent extremism. And at the same time, the new anti-terrorism law also intends to avoid repeating that kind of situation again. Because in the past, you know, when we were countering Al-Qaeda, we had a problem with people engaged in violent activities, particularly those people engaged in kidnapping activities during the heyday of Al-Qaeda, Dos Palmas and Sipadan kidnapping, and even the Basilan kidnapping, the Tamahudong kidnapping cases. And in our research, we learned that majority of those Muslim detainees accused of various crimes associated with terrorism were not even indoctrinated by Al-Qaeda. They were just victims of circumstances. And the new anti-terrorism law aims to really address that problem, separating from hardcore terrorists and victims of circumstances. Because we have to take into account that there are personalities and organizations also misled by violent extremist groups. So that's why we have problems for the radicalization and counter-radicalization and projects for disengagement in order to encourage terrorists from committing acts of terrorism again. And this is a good thing about the new anti-terrorism law. It allows the Anti-Terrorism Council to implement programs that will also encourage proven terrorists to reform through the process of counter-radicalization and the radicalization program. So, and we have to just monitor our law enforcement authorities in implementing that, because for me, that's more important than putting terrorists to jail, to address these underlying conditions.
Thank you, sir. Now let's try to call on Mr. Eugene.
Yes,
He
sir.
was raising his hand earlier.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear,
Yes,
sir.
good morning, Eugene.
Sir, I remember before there was a joint oversight committee on the HSA.
Yes.
Which is
you're right.
Because I think it's a good tool on accountability on the ATC.
Yes.
It's good that the ATC has already broadened yung membership. Dati 7 secretaries lang, ngayon marami na.
8.
And now eight, eight. Okay. And now, but the what was lacking was the oversight committee on the joint oversight committee. Usually, we only see them before during budget hearings. But I hope that uh, they will it will be more active in actually having an oversight on the council itself in pushing for the programs. Will that continue, sir, the joint oversight committee? Because I think it's specifically for the HSA. I don't know if it continues with this present terrorism bill.
There are many civilian oversight institutions that will account the Anti-Terrorism Council from its work. We have the both houses of Congress to perform an oversight function. We also have the civilian agencies of government to account it because they are members of the council. This is just my observation about the Anti-Terrorism Council. It's not structured the way National Security Council is structured because in the National Security Council, there is inclusion of civil society organizations in the council, but it does not have that kind of inclusion in the Anti-Terrorism Council because it's limited to the agencies of government, the 8 agencies of government identified under the law. So what will be our remedy? Our remedy is to lobby for the real empowerment of the Commission of Human Rights, and at the same time, lobby for the implementation of the provision for countering and preventing violent extremism, okay, in order to really include the participation of civilians in the whole process of counterterrorism. Counterterrorism as uh, oversight, performing oversight function in counterterrorism. There are 2 ways to counter terrorism. One is the law enforcement and the non-law enforcement way. In the law enforcement approach, then the civilian has to really be vigilant to make sure that our law enforcement is doing its job. So how can we do that? In the police, they have existing mechanisms for that. But within the Anti-Terrorism Council, then we have to lobby to our senators and congressmen to oversee their function because the Anti-Terrorism Council still needs to get budget from both houses of Congress. So we
Yes,
can
but
lobby them to account them.
yun nga, sir, my point is that it was already present, the Joint Oversight Committee, specifically for the HSA before, para nga magkaroon sila ng participation in actually oversighting as representatives of the people, yung senator, saka yung congressman. They can actually have that safeguard that they should use. Because before it was not used. Now, I'm not sure right now in the present law if it will follow dun sa Joint Oversight Committee of both houses in Congress sa HSA. Will it continue with the 8th Anti-Terrorism Bill that is passed right now?
We need to check again the existing law whether that kind of joint oversight function is retained or removed. I need to check on that.
Okay,
I need to check on that.
Like because it's a nice safeguard. So people are asking
I agree.
of
I agree
safeguards
absolutely.
on the Anti-Terrorism Bill. This actually can be a safeguard and actually looking after dun sa programs ng Anti-Terrorism Bill to have an oversight in the Senate and both sa House, wherein even opposition, our members can actually participate.
Correct. Yeah. While you're talking, I will check briefly my file on the oversight. Yeah, there's still a joint oversight committee under Section 50 of
Okay,
the.
thank you.
Yeah, there's still it's retained there, composed of 12 members.
Yeah, yes, sir. Yeah.
So I'm very happy that they
some
did
people
not
are asking for safeguards. This is a good mechanism for a safeguard that the Senate and the House actually can participate in actually having an oversight on the bill and the
Correct. It's
implementation of
in
the
Section
bill.
50 that upon activity of this act, a joint congressional oversight committee is hereby constituted, and the committee shall be composed of 12 members with the chairperson of the Committee on Public Order of the Senate
Yes.
and the House of Representatives as members, and 5 additional members from each house to be designated by the Senate President and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, blah, blah, blah. So
Yes,
it's
sir.
in
Yes, sir.
Section 50. So
Apo,
it's
sir.
retained
Apo.
there. It's retained.
Yes, sir.
So in fact, this is a beautiful part of this new anti-terrorism law that we need to discuss publicly in order to allay fears of some critics that there's no oversight
Yes.
in this law. So it's retained under Section 50. Thank you very much for raising that very important point. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'll call the following to start para we can sequence the questions. First, Mr. Chris Tine. I will just, if I can just read the question. Hi,
Yeah,
thank you,
please.
Prof. Banlaoi, for the presentation. Which
Thank
program
you.
do you suggest that the government should prioritize in countering and preventing violence extremism?
Well, for me, the very important aspect of the CPVE, yung third item in the law, that is good governance. You know, if we see good governance, does not only mean national government, but also local government. If you will look at the areas where we have terrorist groups, these are areas where we see the lack of good governance. You know, these are conflict-affected areas where criminal groups and terrorist groups lord over certain population. They are governing. So we need to provide them an alternative government that is really responsive to the people on the ground. For example, if you go to Talipao, Sulu, is running lording over there. It's the Abu Sayyaf group in Talipao, in Danan, So we need to increase the capacity of our local government there to make themselves, to make their presence felt by the people. Because what the people is feeling is the presence of these terrorist groups, sometimes ruling them by a coercion or from or other means. So we really have to promote good governance at the local level and good governance at the national level, whether it is democratic or otherwise, as long as it will make people happy. If the people is not happy, then terrorism will persist.
Okay, noted. So
Terrorism will
I will
persist.
call Sir Poch Del Prado, followed by Crystal, and then John Sangalang. Poch?
Great.
Sir Poch Del Prado?
Hello, good morning.
Hello, good morning. Good morning,
Sir Poch, we can barely hear you. Can you speak louder, please?
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning, Professor. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
Nice look.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Professor, you mentioned earlier about the law enforcers not being the monsters that they are perceived to be. Now, more often than not, when these law enforcers have to enforce the law, so to speak, it is the private security, the guard, and the private security management who are on the front line to receive these law enforcers.
Right.
And, how and what would you recommend that should we in the private security adopt so that we do not become impediments, we do not impede with these law enforcers in enforcing the law, especially particularly with this particular bill. For example, in our organization, if somebody is the subject of the Anti-Terrorism Council and their operatives, when they come to enforce that law, how should we, as the frontliners, receive these law enforcers? What policies should we adopt? How should we train the private security guards so that we do not become impediments? That's all, Professor.
Yeah, very excellent question. This is my understanding of the current setup, the Philippine National Police. All operating arms and even policy arms of the Philippine National Police have their own advisory council, because I have been a member of that advisory council. And I think it is necessary for the private security professionals to really lobby for inclusion for membership in the advisory council, because this is my because I was also invited to sit in this advisory council, but I am looking for like a person like you or Ace to sit in those councils. So I think you should lobby strongly for representation in this advisory council, so that you will have a say in advising our law enforcement of what to do. And based on my experience being a member of the advisory council, for example, of the CIDG, they will listen. They will listen. Okay. And right now, I'm a member of the advisory council of Drug Enforcement Group. I advocated for some measure. They will listen as long as it is a legitimate issue. So I think you should lobby. You should engage them. You should demand inclusion in these advisory councils, so that your positions, even your worries and any concerns, okay, will be heard there. And not only will be heard, based on my experience, if they find it doable, they will do it. Yeah, they will do it. So that's my specific recommendation to private security professions, to seek, demand inclusion in the membership in their various advisory councils.
Professor,
Thank you.
thank you very much for your very enlightening answer. However, I would like to add also that years ago, I think Ace Esmeralda, Captain Esmeralda will back me up on this. Several of us who were quite active in the hotel security and safety industry were actually members of the National Security Council Security and Safety Coordinating Council. But that was very early in the 2000s. And it was a very good organization, and we had very good coordination then. I do not know what happened. However, I hope, Professor and Ace, being where you are now, perhaps you can help us in the private security industry revisit, that policy that you recommended right now, for us to have a position to be able to lobby and become members of that advisory council. Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Good.
Miss Crystal.
Hello, Crystal.
Hello, sir. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
In relation to the previous question, my question would be on the matter of the permanent management of the 2020 Anti-Terrorism Council. What is the assurance that the council will ensure multi-agency or whole of a nation approach, and that the government, private sectors, and civil society organizations are truly involved? Because as mentioned, the Human Security Act of 2007 did consist of a collaborative joint task force with all sectors. However, there were concerns on the matter of cooperation, participation, trust, and transparency.
Very good. So I know where this question is coming from, and I would like to inform the participants that Crystal conducted a thesis assessing our Anti-Terrorism Council. So she knows what he's talking about. So I think when this law is passed, we have to lobby for participation in the crafting of implementing rules and regulation to ensure participation not only of the private sector, but also of the wider civil society group. What I observed in the existing law is the lack of discussion about gender in counterterrorism. So we need to also put gender perspective in counterterrorism, especially in the context of growing numbers of women getting involved in acts of terrorism. So in the implementing rules and regulation, we have to make sure that those issues are also taken into account. So especially private sector participation and other perspectives like gender perspective, because that is not found in the new anti-terrorism law, and even in the old law it's not found, gender perspective and greater private sector participation.
Sir John Sanggalang.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning, John.
Professor, good morning.
Good morning.
This question, actually, I posted it already, but I would like to really verbalize it right now. So my questions, under the 1987 Constitution of the Philippines, it categorically prohibits the passing of any ex post facto law.
Yeah.
Obviously,
We're losing you.
hello?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, now you're clear again.
Okay. This law now that is supposed to be passed upon the signature of the executive, obviously does not have its IRR right now. But
Yeah.
my question now is, this law will obviously not cover previous offenses. However,
yes,
we all know that's, my question is, can certain previous actions of helping, assisting, or even cuddling proscribed or suspected terrorist group be now or can still be used as a requirement to ask the court to conduct legal wiretapping for those individuals or group right now upon passing this?
In my understanding of our discussions of that topic in our study group, it can be applied, wiretapping. For example, if I'm being suspected of financing terrorism, then in order to gather enough evidence to try me for committing a crime, then they can ask the Court of Appeals to conduct wiretapping operations, lawful wiretapping operations. In fact, even me, I want to disclose this to the participants, that even me, I have a dilemma. For example, I told them, sometimes I maintain people on the ground to get information, and these people on the ground is associated with terrorist groups. And sometimes I provide resources for this informant to get me information. Will I be charged of financing terrorism because that individual is associated with a terrorist group?
Did you get the answer for that?
I got the answer from my friends in the law enforcement. As long as, Professor, you will not take that, you will not hide that from us, and you will inform us, then so that you will not be suspected. Because I had that kind of experience in the past, that I was linked with Abu Sayyaf group. That there was to share intelligence information linking me with the Abu Sayyaf group, only to find out that those persons who prepared that intelligence report, share, did not know me personally. So when it went up to the higher level, this is Professor Bala, we know him. So that's it. So that's coordination with law enforcement is very essential, so that I will not be suspected of any crimes associated with acts of terrorism. So I'm just doing this for academic or policy making purposes.
Yes, Professor, probably your situation is justifiable or understandable because, as you mentioned, it's for research purposes. Yeah. However, there are certain specific individuals whom we previously know had been cuddling suspected terrorist or soon to be proscribed terrorists. So if they have been open before, obviously that they've been helping, and then this law will be passed now, can their previous action be used as a justification for them to be wiretapped or be legally investigated?
I think so because they are being suspected, right? But they need to gather new evidence. So the application of the evidences should be gathered after the passing of this law. But all other evidences that were collected should only be used for referencing, but not as actual evidence in court. You can only use evidence in court after the passage of the law.
Okay, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Prof.
Like for example, if they suspect me of financing terrorism in the past, then I even encourage my friends in the law enforcement, then you can wiretap me that I'm not really financing terrorism. I am financing counterterrorism.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof.
There's
Yes.
just one question from another participant. Dr. Banlaoi, what are your thoughts on the hashtag junk terror bill movement that has been circulating on social media? Is there a misconception or misunderstanding on the provisions of the Anti-Terrorism Bill in terms of those who can be considered as a suspect terrorist? Should they post, share, or like posts that express grievances or criticism towards the government?
You know, I am a victim of that junk anti-terrorism bill. Even my son is asking me on why I'm supporting this bill. You know, the power of social media. But where I have to enlighten my own son about my support to the anti-terrorism law. And that is why I'm doing this kind of webinar to also enlighten the people that, you know, that this perception about this new anti-terrorism law is not really accurate. But we understand, we welcome them voicing their worries. We welcome them voicing their anxieties. We welcome them voicing their doubts. And that is very, very important. And I hope all these voices and doubts and frustrations, okay, will be taken into account by our authorities in order to make sure that when this law is passed, our authorities can prove those critics wrong. And I hope those critics are wrong and our law enforcement is right. That's why I understand where these frustrations are coming from because of the poor track record of our security sector, especially in the context of the drug of war, the drug against war, the war against drug, and in the context of the leadership style of President Duterte. So I understand where those fears are coming from. But this is my personal opinion also. When I examine some personalities and groups opposed to the anti-terrorism bill, you know, there's no doubt that some groups are being suspected of being linked with the communist movement, supporting the armed struggle of the New People's Army. In my opinion, if this law is passed, this law can be applied against them. You know, for example, the fronts of the communist movement. Okay, so if they are supporting armed struggle, if they're supporting the violent activities of the New People's Army, then the anti-terrorism law can be applied against them. But if you have legitimate political grievances and you want to air your legitimate political grievances through the use of nonviolence, through a peaceful means, there's nothing to be worried about. Yeah. But that's why our authorities are given powers under the new anti-terrorism law to conduct wiretapping activities in order to gather strong evidences that an individual or an organization is in fact promoting, assisting, financing, cuddling terrorist organizations. It's in fact a wiretapping activities will also be an evidence to prove the innocence of the suspect. If they cannot gather any evidences, okay, then there's nothing to worry about. Me, I'm open for wiretapping also because I have nothing to hide. You know, I have nothing to hide. But if you're hiding something, you know, you're supporting a movement advocating armed struggle, okay, and endorsing the use of violence like ransom, roadside bombing, even murder and homicide, okay, then the law can also be applied because in my interpretation, this law does not only aim to address the problem of terrorism in the country. It also aims to address the problem of armed violence in general. Okay, armed violence.
Okay. This one is from Mr. June T. Mr. June, are you still there? Let me just read out loud his question. With the new law, does our political leadership suspected to help terrorist groups have still immunity, exempted from surveillance, wiretapping, etc.? For sure, this will be a hot topic forwarding to the Senate.
Yes, yes. Those are technical issues, no? So I don't know other technicalities when it comes to that. Yeah. So regarding immunity, so I leave that to the lawyer for interpretation. I'm just handling the political aspect of it.
Okay, copy that.
But when it comes
Next.
to legal technical aspect, I'm not competent to address those issues or even render my opinion.
Okay.
When it comes to technical matters, it's beyond my core competence. Yeah.
Let's now call Mr. Ramil, raising your hand. Sir Ramil.
Yes, sir. Professor, good
morning,
afternoon.
Ramil.
I'm Ramil.
Yeah,
I'm a graduate student. Yeah, I'm here at
Yes.
Australia. I'm a graduate student of National Security College here at ANU.
Oh,
So my question, sir,
congratulations.
is
Yeah.
yes, sir. One of my courses about terrorism. So
very good.
I understand that terrorism will always continue to exist, and neither laws nor any other initiative of the government can eliminate this threat. So that's a fact.
Yeah.
So my question, sir, is it impossible to achieve complete deterrence on terrorism because terrorists are capable of innovating their tactics to evade the deterrence policies of a state? That's my first question. And my second question is that how does the government ensure that democratic liberties for the sake of the war on terrorism not to be counterproductive and can be capitalized by the terrorists, especially when people start to turn against the counterterrorism policies of the government?
Yeah. Terrorist threats are evolving, and so our law enforcement must also evolve. And this was the observation in the past that law enforcement was static, countering dynamic terrorist threat. So part of the dynamism also of this new anti-terrorism law is to evolve also. Then if there's a need in the future to repeal this law because this law is no longer responsive to the current threat that we face, then we need to amend this law also. The law enforcement should innovate faster than the threat that we face. And this is our observation. Terrorist groups, when they innovate, they do sprint very fast. But law enforcement, because of bureaucratic considerations, okay, they're doing a marathon very slow in their innovation. That's why governments must also innovate. And the new anti-terrorism law is part of the best efforts of the government to also innovate in order to address the evolving nature of terrorism. In fact, even the Islamic State is changing right now. Under the new leadership of Al-Qurashi. So we need to take into account those changes also. So we have to make our approach also very flexible. But the fear also of the public is that, if we give our law enforcement authorities free rein, then they might use this against us. That's why we have to be on guard. We have to be vigilant that our law enforcement will not use this against us. This law aims to protect us, not against us. This law is against terrorists, not innocent individuals. I think that's the spirit of the law. If you have read the book of Baron de Montesquieu about the spirit of the law, you have to read the spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law under the new anti-terrorism law is to counter terrorists and not to counter innocent civilians. That's the spirit of the law. Now, if there are implementers of the law using this law against innocent civilians, then the new anti-terrorism law has provisions for penalizing individuals using this law illegally to harm the innocents. This law is specifically against terrorist organizations and against individuals supporting, financing, and even propagating the idea of terrorist organizations. That's the main spirit of this law.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that very enlightening comment. Thank you.
I'll read out loud two questions from Sir Hermie Colina. Do courts have a role in proscribing terrorist organizations or just the ATC? And will there be Inspectorate General for Intelligence in the PNP and AFP?
The court has a role. The Supreme Court has a role. They have a role, but the Anti-Terrorism Council will do the initial legwork upon the recommendation of the National Coordinating Agency. And even in the Anti-Terrorism Council, one of the members of the Anti-Terrorism Council is the Department of Justice. In fact, for me, when this law is passed, I will pay more attention to the role of the Department of Justice because I want to really fight terrorism with justice. So I will put greater attention on the role of the Department of Justice to make sure that justice will prevail in the implementation of the anti-terrorism law. Because if this law will be used to commit injustices to the people, then you will just recreate and reproduce terrorists around.
The second question, Professor, will there be Inspectorate General?
Inspector, I'm not sure about that particular aspect, the role of the Inspector General. I have to look into that, the role of the Inspector General. Yeah. I'll check the role if there's the Inspector General because I'm not sure about it. It's not in the law. But if somebody thinks that it must be included, then you have to lobby because in fact the law is not yet signed by the president. You can still make representations, but I think it will be signed very, very soon. As we speak now, I think the both houses of Congress are now preparing for the transmission of this law for signing of the president.
Okay.
But if it's not included, then we can still make our voices heard in the crafting of the implementing rules and regulation.
Okay, noted, sir. This one is from Mon 2K. What specific reforms in the intelligence to make them more responsible and accountable that you can cite, sir?
Yeah, for example, the National Intelligence Coordinating Agency. Then for me, because they get their budget from the Congress, we need the Congress to exercise its civilian function. Okay, and the courts also must make sure, make sure that the intelligence sectors are not doing things above the law. So for me, it's the Congress and the judiciary that should perform oversight function over intelligence sector. And at the same time, also conducting training for the intelligence units in charge of counterterrorism so that they will embrace the value of responsible and accountable performance of duty, that they are responsible and accountable. Now, if there's erring intelligence officer using wiretapping technologies for personal or political purposes, then we have to account that officers. Yeah.
Okay. This one is from Ms. Ivy Santos. With the intention of the new law, will the government ensure the country that if a certain person was proven to be a real threat and was tagged as a supporter of such terror groups, will the penalty of that certain person be directly under or be based under the anti-terrorism law? because
Yes,
mostly accused individuals are charged with illegal possession of FAs and explosives, which I think these charges are not directly directed to terrorism.
yeah, that's the problem of the Human Security Act of 2007, because our law enforcement does not want to use that law. They are resorting to another law, the revised penal code. So they are just being charged of ordinary crimes. But terrorism is not an ordinary crime. Okay. That is why if you are involved in terrorist acts and engage in violence, then and if you're proven guilty, then the new anti-terrorism law can be applied to you. And if you're proven guilty of financing and even participating in actual acts of terrorism, there are concomitant punishments for that.
And she has
Even
this
for supporting, I think, 12 years of imprisonment.
follow-up question. With the new law, I think AMLC should also have a great participation with regards to this, because obviously terrorism will not run without their source of financing.
What's ML? Yeah, the anti-money laundering council. Yes, yes. In fact, the new anti-terrorism law is also a requirement by, I think, International Financial Task Force, to strengthen our capability to counter the financing of terrorism. And that is one important aspect of the new anti-terrorism law, to counter the financing of terrorism. So if we will pass this law, we will be removed from the gray list of nations that are not compliant with the requirements of the financial task force.
Okay. I'm sorry to rush through the questions, Professor, but we are close to our target line. This one is from Jericho Maranan. What standard will be used by the court in granting a petition for a legal wiretap?
Then they need to convince the court that wiretapping is essential to get enough evidence to put terrorists to justice. Because the main purpose of wiretapping is to get enough evidence that they are supporting, financing, or planning any acts of terrorism.
Okay.
They need to convince the court that is necessary. If the court is not convinced, then it will not be granted. That's why there's the power of the court. And for me, even with that, even in the area of wiretapping operation, I think the Commission of Human Rights must also pay attention to that detail. That's why we need to also strengthen the power of the Commission on Human Rights so that it can perform its function fully.
Okay. This one is about the urgency of the bill. From Crystal, why is this bill being prioritized during this challenging pandemic, while this pandemic is ongoing and has brought about even more pressing problems, transportation, medication, etc.? Why does this bill come first?
Well, I'm not in the authority to discuss the details of that, but let me give my opinion about that matter and my analysis about that matter. First, the threat of terrorism in the Philippines is real. There are intentions from active terrorist groups in the Philippines to mount violent attacks anytime, anywhere in the country. So they have that intention, and that intention is not hidden. You can see that if you are examining their exchanges through social media and following the announcement of the Islamic State. Okay, if you will notice, during the pandemic, terrorist activities have not stopped. And if you are aware of my article published during the third year commemoration of the Marawi siege, I enumerated several violent activities initiated by these terrorist groups. And at the same time, even prior to the pandemic, we have seen that terrorist groups in the Philippines are now employing higher form of violence, and that is suicide terrorism, involving not only foreign terrorist fighters, but local terrorist fighters. In other words, there's an urgency to pass this bill amidst the pandemic because of the clear and present danger emanating from these terrorist threats. Second, why suddenly our government suspended the obligation of the visiting forces agreement? For me, that is a golden opportunity, because that means that with the suspension of the termination of the visiting forces agreement, then we can now allow American personnel to visit us again in order to conduct counterterrorism training, counterterrorism advice, okay, and counterterrorism capacity building so that we can address this imminent threat squarely. As a scholar of terrorist problems in the Philippines, I am privy to some information about the threat that these groups can can present to our country. They are really planning something big, you know. They're planning something big and they want to take advantage of the attention to take advantage of the situation because our law enforcement authorities are busy with the quarantine measures during the pandemic and they want to take advantage of this situation to do something because that is something that's being encouraged by the Islamic State, by the central leadership, okay, of the Islamic State or ISIS. And pro-ISIS terrorist groups in the Philippines are in fact responding to this call to mount violent attacks as part of their global jihad. So I think that is the urgency. I think that our government has information about imminent threats facing our country that requires immediate action. And these threats can only be addressed if law enforcement have the capabilities to prevent them from committing acts of terrorism. So I think that is where the urgency is coming from. But if you will look at the history of this new anti-terrorism bill, it was discussed 2 years ago. It was approved by the Senate in February, even before the pandemic took place. Okay. It's only now that it's being rushed by the president because I think, okay, there is a current assessment about serious threat facing our country, requiring immediate actions of our law enforcement. Otherwise, you know, these terrorist groups will find opportunities to carry out their malevolent intentions to wreak havoc in our country. Yeah. Hello.
There are other questions in the chat group. We will just forward them to you, Professor. Thank you very much, Sir Ace.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and thank you very much for the engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I know that a lot of us are bitten and we will still have more sessions. We hope that the future sessions will be more as dynamic as we have now today. And I hope everyone has have a lot of takeaways. No? So I'd like to thank Professor Banlaoi, PhD, for helping us. And then like to thank also our MC and moderator, Wally of Resilient PH. Thank you very much for ACE and Associates, SecurityMatters, Arsland, SRS, and Resilient PH. So thank you everyone for joining, and I hope to see you again in our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ace, and thank you to everyone for your participation. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you, Ace. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, sirs.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Ace. Thank you, Sir Banlaoi.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you, Dalia. Thank you, Abba, if you're still around. And thank you to everyone who asked questions. Thank you, participated. Please visit our website, www.pipvtr.org. SecurityMatters is our media partner, and even Philippine Defense News and Eurasia Review. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Sir Ace.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.